Hey everyone, welcome to the show. For those joining me again, welcome back. And if you're watching for the first time, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we bring common sense and reason to the big issues of the day and try to go beyond what is considered permissible discourse in the mainstream media space. Today, we're focusing on what appears to many people, including yours truly, to be an increasingly authoritarian streak in the Canada ruled by Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, now propped up by their socialist allies in the NDP. As we talked about last week, the federal government has been way out of step when it comes to vaccine mandates compared to most other advanced nations, and even compared to the provinces for that matter, who've gotten rid of vaccine and mask mandates. The Trudeau Liberals clung on to these vaccine mandates, making it impossible for the millions of unvaccinated Canadians. They were put on leave without pay if they worked for the federal government. They couldn't travel within or outside of Canada because they were unvaccinated. This policy, thankfully, finally changed June 14th with the vaccine mandate for both domestic and outbound international travel, and the vaccine mandate for federal public servants and transportation workers who were suspended, the policy going into effect June 20th. However, Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos says that future vaccine mandates would rely on a new definition of what it means to be fully vaccinated. Presumably, this would include boosters, or maybe more boosters down the road, given that boosters also lose their efficacy within a few months. And of course, we saw constitutional authoritarianism on full display with the Trudeau government dubiously invoking the Emergencies Act and quickly scrapping it after it was already in use because it was coming up for a possible defeat in the Senate. We've seen nothing like this in any other advanced country, or even in any developing country for that matter. And that brings us to today's guest. Rav Arora, like me, was born in India, but his family moved to Canada when he was 4 years old. He's 21 years old and he's chosen not to be vaccinated. As he recounts in a recent New York Post article that was widely shared, his life and that of millions of other Canadians who've chosen not to be vaccinated became increasingly difficult. Perhaps what upset large sections of the Liberal commentariat was not so much Rav's criticism of Canada under Trudeau, but his pointed observation that in some ways the country that his parents left behind appears to be more liberal than Canada. In fact, on vaccine mandates, here's something interesting. The Indian Supreme Court recently ruled in a remarkable judgment that the Constitution and the laws must respect bodily autonomy and ruled against federal vaccine mandates in principle, even though the Indian government hasn't implemented any such mandates. Rav's comments created a firestorm amongst the angst-ridden Liberal commentariat and engulfed even those of us who shared his piece. I was told by one disgruntled person that if I didn't like it here in Canada, guess what? I should just go back to where I came from. This was just one of many such xenophobic comments, ironically coming from those who profess to be liberal and progressive. So it is my great pleasure to have Rav on the show to talk about his piece, his experiences, and the insane reactions that both his piece and the sharing of it has unleashed. Hey, Rav, welcome to the show. So let me just jump into, my first question. You've obviously heard the news from June 14th that the federal government has lifted some of these onerous vaccine mandates, and presumably, like me, you welcome the news. What's your reaction? And do you think the feds reacted partly due to pressure from people like us who've been telling them to get rid of the vaccine mandates? What's been your general reaction to the news?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'm very happy about this, given that I have family in India and I have family members here, including parents and other relatives who have been dying to go to India for a very long time, but have been unable to. And including myself as well, for doing a lot of things in the US. I've been unable to do that because of the vaccine mandates. And so I'm just really happy and very relieved that we're doing this now. However, I will say that it's been a long time in the coming, and it's not like some new revelatory science has emerged showing that now we can get rid of the mandates. That's pretty obvious. What's what I think is happening is that it's come to the point where keeping the mandates is politically damaging for Trudeau. So he's picking the expedient option, which is to get rid of them, because so much blowback he's gotten from even like conservatives for sure, and also the libertarian people associated with the People's Party of Canada, and also there's a strong coalition, I would say, of left-leaning, very progressive people who are all about civil liberties and personal autonomy, and that part of the political landscape here in Canada has been increasingly alienated by the NDP and the Liberal Party, that have been very pro-vaccine mandate, which are not really fundamentally progressive or liberal values, at least not traditionally. So at this point so far, with all of that's happened, with the former hockey player who posted that viral video of his horrible experience at the Toronto airport, and now Trudeau being at this event he was at, I think it was LA, or was it somewhere else, where he was unmasked, and then at a different event he was masked, and then he got COVID, and then he re-entered the country, which he probably wasn't supposed to do. And so we've seen this again and again, of leaders breaking their own rules. We've seen that in the US as well. And so the pressure has been mounting. And I think at this point, they've wisely at least done the cost benefit analysis and have concluded that getting rid of the mandates is the better option to stay in power and to appease their people.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I think it's stopped being politically useful to the Trudeau government and the Liberals. It was a useful wedge issue during last fall's election, and I think now it's just I think they're getting a lot of blowback from keeping these mandates in place, especially when you consider the fact that Canada is really an outlier when it comes to enforcing vaccine mandates. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of political pressure, and also pressure within the Liberal caucus, as we learned from a few days ago, that most members in the Liberal caucus actually oppose the vaccine mandates and have been putting pressure on the government to get rid of them. But so I completely agree with you. So could we turn to the piece that you wrote for the New York Post recently, which was widely shared, it went viral, and it also, I want to talk about the reactions to that piece, not just towards you, but even towards those of us who shared the piece, including myself. It really seemed to needle a lot of people that, that Canada doesn't look so liberal when compared to not just other Western countries, but even to a developing country like India. I happen to be originally from India as well, which, let's face it, I mean, India doesn't necessarily have a stellar record on individual liberties. You just have to tune into the news today to see what's happening in the country. Were you trying to be a little provocative with that comparison, or do you genuinely believe that today's India may actually be more tolerant in some respects than today's Canada?
Yeah. I think the comparison that I made appeared so incendiary because people read a little too much into it, or extrapolated more from that comparison than what I was actually saying. Well, what I actually said was not as incendiary as people thought it was. But what I said is that I can't remember the exact wording, but I said basically that I'm now considering the possibility that perhaps my civil liberties in India would have been more well established and protected than here. And I was specifically talking about vaccine mandates, as well broadly of bodily autonomy, free speech, and other principles. What I wasn't saying was overall India is perhaps has a better record on civil liberties, human rights, free speech, etc. I've heard of cases recently of comedians in India and in various parts being censored or being even arrested for certain jokes. There's one comedian whose name is escaping me. He was recently on Andrew Schultz's podcast talking about it. So I was not making as broad or sweeping of a claim about India versus Canada as people thought. And I only said I'm considering the possibility, especially with respect to vaccine mandates, which is true, that they don't have vaccine mandates like we do here, and especially the area where I'm at, which is Amritsar. They don't have vaccine mandates, and they don't have potentially some of the corruption issues that other places have, although I'm not really well versed in Indian politics as many other people are. I don't follow it as closely, but the claim I was making was very specific, and people seem to have read way too much into it and were just outraged all over. People writing for Global News, Toronto Star, they were, I think, having a very good time enjoying dunking on me for reasons that were not warranted.
I think they were having a meltdown. I think that's how I would describe it. There was a collective meltdown because I think you touched a nerve. That's the sense I got, because many of the reactions were also directed towards me. But that brings us to an important point here, which is, the substance of your criticism were related to the vaccine mandates. That was the context in which you were making your observations were made in that context. But you also refer to the Emergencies Act, and you refer to the highly problematic Bill C-36, which can censor free speech even before it's uttered, sort of like the precogs in Minority Report. Do you want to explain and amplify the reasons you think some of these policies are authoritarian and illiberal, and why does it make you so uneasy about where Canada is headed under Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, there seems to be this trend over the past few years, and now as well, of more and more government regulation over things that I don't think need to be regulated. And we've seen this in the past with the online harms bill that was rejected, and now they're bringing back another iteration of it seems to be, and there's of course the whole media stuff too of CBC being funded by the liberal government, and things like that. I understand where it's coming from, but I think really those things I think are essentially giving the liberal government a lot of privilege in maintaining their power and having some kind of centralized forces that are going to maintain the status quo and keep their power sort of unchecked. I mean, if you read the CBC and the Toronto Star and even the Globe and Mail, sometimes they can be more nuanced, and I've written for them a couple of times before and written some more contrarian kind of pieces, but those institutions, I think, aren't doing a really good job of keeping Trudeau's power in check. And it's no wonder, given that they're receiving bailouts from the government. And now we're seeing this more with the online harms bill, which it's as it's been advertised, it's a way to protect minority groups from online discrimination, hate, marginalization, etc. But those very same groups are speaking out against it and saying that, whoa, we shouldn't be doing this. This is a huge overreach. I mean, you have the Canadian National Muslim Association, you have some LGBTQ activists and some other groups as well who have not particularly supported what Trudeau is trying to implement with the online harms bill for protecting minority groups, with this broad overreach in which possibly the government and law enforcement could have power to regularly monitor and keep checks on various people based on civilian complaints. It's very messy, and I'm not particularly I fail to understand what exactly how exactly that's going to work, given the fact that the parameters are so vague and so overreaching, especially when we're talking about discrimination against individual people or against groups. I mean, who decides what is anti-Muslim or what is anti-gay or what is anti-trans or however these things are going to pan out? So there's a lot of subjectivity, and so for the government to try to mandate and try to implement more strict restrictions on what can be said online, I think is a very dangerous precedent, and I think it should be rejected right from the start.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think those of us who value individual liberty and freedoms, have to constantly keep speaking up for them. And there's so much of that's there's so much to be depressed about, really, given the direction in which things are headed. But I want to ask you, have you thought about possibly leaving Canada? given the illiberal and authoritarian turn this country has taken? I ask this because, this is a question that this is something I hear quite regularly from people that I've spoken to, especially people I met during the Freedom Convoy protests. And I always ask them, do you think Canada has become is so far down the road to authoritarianism that, the best option is to exit? My own thinking is that, Canada is worth fighting for, and that it's important to stay and fight the good fight. But do you think Canada is worth fighting for? And do you think the Trudeau government softening its stance on vaccine mandates is a promising sign, or do you think it's just a tactical maneuver, which doesn't necessarily signal a fundamental change in direction?
Yeah, well, I'm very optimistic on these things, and I do want to leave Canada for other reasons. I do want to move to a bigger city, possibly in Los Angeles or New York. That's always been a dream of mine, to move to a big city and potentially pursue dreams in film and television, making documentaries, etc. Currently, I live in a small rural city, a couple hours away from Vancouver at the moment. So I'd love to move, but in terms of the broader national question, I don't think I see a reason now to move because of that, especially because I don't think Trudeau is going to stay in power for much longer. Whenever the next election will be, I think the Conservatives have gotten an incredible amount of support, record-breaking number of Conservative Party memberships, and Pierre Poilievre is getting a lot of support. A lot of people who were even more libertarian leaning or more classically liberal seem to be now supporting either People's Party of Canada, which is getting a bit of momentum, or the Conservative Party. And given like gas prices, given the online censorship, given the supply management issue as well, I think more and more Canadians are going to be moving away from Trudeau and looking at other options. And so I don't think that Trudeau will win the next election. So I think leaving at this point would be premature and fairly pessimistic.
Okay, so Canada is worth fighting for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I hope you'll stay. I know Los Angeles. I love Los Angeles, and of course, it's a very exciting place to be in, and probably lots more opportunities there. But I hope you'll stay in Canada because Canada certainly needs people like you, committed to the ideals of liberty and freedom. And the more people like you we lose, the harder it'll be to make the case. So on that note, Rav, I'm going to have to leave it there, but it was great to have you on the show, and I wish you all the best, and hopefully you have some great plans to celebrate the good news that the vaccine mandates have been lifted, and that hopefully you'll be able to visit your relatives in India.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, from one Indian Canadian dissident to the next. It's good talking to you.
Yeah, great chatting with you, Rav. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.